Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to Ramadan Radio, broadcasting on 87.9 FM, on the web on ramadanradio.org, and on Facebook, streaming on Ramadan Radio London, as well as on YouTube. This is a Know Your Deen show, and you're with your host today, Sister Irma. I hope everybody's doing well as we're now approaching the last few days of this holy month. And I hope everyone's looking forward to a good Eid, inshallah, after the blessings of this month. So today we are talking about a topic that some people may have heard of, may not have heard of, but something the Muslim community and all communities actually would do well to know a little bit more about and to be a bit more informed. So what we're going to do today is, let me introduce my two very special guests first. So let me start with Sheikh Osman. Brother Osman, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Now, Sheikh Osman was born in Kenya and came to the UK as a child. He then traveled abroad for higher religious studies and spent 9 years at the historic seminary Jamia Islamia Dabal in India. And he's graduated as a Hafiz, a Qari, and an Alim, mashallah. He then completed a certificate in legal studies in Birmingham. He's a seasoned Nikah officer, so you do lots of weddings, and a public speaker leading Jummah prayers, providing religious, spiritual, and pastoral care within the NHS to staff, patients, and visitors from diverse faith traditions. Sheikh Osman is passionate about raising awareness of fostering and adoption and is eager to find ways by which Muslim communities can address the physical and spiritual needs of children in care. And he also maintains a keen interest in interfaith relations, diversity training, healthcare, and education. So welcome, brother. It's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Hannah Jennings. Hello, Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's good to have you on here. Hannah is the Inquiries and Placement Manager at PACT, and PACT is a Parents and Children Together adoption charity that finds, prepares, and supports a wide range of adoptive families from across the southeast of England. PACT has been building and strengthening families since 1911. Wow, that's some years, and is proud to have been rated as outstanding by Ofsted in the last 2 consecutive inspections. Last year, during the height of the pandemic, PACT helped to promote to complete 62 families, which meant a permanent family for 84 children. Wow. Hannah has been working at PACT for almost 11 years, and her role involves working closely with adopters to complete their families and provide secure and loving homes for children who are waiting to be adopted. So welcome to both my guests. So today we want to talk about adoption as it is in Islam, and we want to really spread awareness within our communities about the Sunnah. Now we hear this word Sunnah, and this basically means it's a tradition of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet Muhammad, who is our last and noble messenger. We want to know about the possible issues around it, and then also to share the process of how people can adopt in the UK. So Sheikh Osman, tell me, we talk about adoption. Is this, as I put in my title, a new path, or is this a sunnah of our Prophet, peace be upon him?
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, there is a misunderstanding in our communities, and that is based mainly on semantics. The way the word adoption is used and understood carries a particular meaning. So within a UK context, adoption has a particular notion, and people understand it from that point of view. Mm-hmm. When we look at the tradition, Sunnah is whatever the Prophet ﷺ said, did, what was done in his presence, and he endorsed. All of these are included in the term Sunnah, which is a path that has been walked on by generations from Rasulullah ﷺ's time. And indeed, even before then, when we look at the Quran and we look at the story of Musa alayhi salam, his mother handing him over in a basket in the river Nile, mm-hmm. and Prophet Musa alayhi salam being raised in Pharaoh's household. And when we look at Maryam alayhi salam's mother giving her up for adoption, even before she's born, she makes a dua and pledges that what her next born will be given to the masjid to be brought up in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mm-hmm. And then when she gives birth to Maryam alayhi salam, she says, Inni wada'tuha untha, that I've given birth to a girl. So adoption pre-Islamic existed, and adoption in the Arabian sort of region existed prior to Islam as well. And we need to look at adoption within the prism of history, of cultural acceptance of this practice. And when we look at it widely, we see adoption taking place in all sorts of forms, informal adoption. And if there is time, I will share my own personal experience in that respect. But also, these practices have been accepted, which is an informal way of looking after a child that is not your biological child. But from an Islamic perspective, Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam emphasized the need to take care of children that were orphaned, abandoned, and without parental care from their biological parents. So it's something that has been stressed quite a lot in the Quran itself. There's more than 20 references to take care of orphans, and taking care meant that you looked after their physical, emotional, spiritual needs, and met their financial needs as well. So adoption, as we understand it within the UK context, and how it is understood within the Muslim communities, is taking care of complete needs of that child, to the extent that the biological parents are out of the equation. Once a child ends up into adoption, then the culture in Arabia was that the child would lose all sorts of links, all sorts of ties, all sorts of responsibilities, or all sorts of opportunities to benefit through inheritance from their biological parents. So that was the norm, and it needs to be understood within that context that Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam took on not one, but a number of children in his care and adopted them.
No, thank you. That's very, very useful insight, isn't it? The whole concept of charity anyway, and especially in this month of giving, taking care of the orphans, taking care of the poor, taking care of the even, strangers and travelers even that we meet. The whole thing of concept of giving in Islam is so evident. But I find that people are very easily able to give money to affairs outside of their country. They'll send money for orphanages and charities abroad, but we tend to forget that actually we need to give more in our own neighborhoods and communities and in our country, where there are plenty of children who do need to be provided homes. And Hannah, I wonder if you could just come in here, maybe, if you could perhaps give us some statistics, if you have some, just on how many children are there who are, in care or currently looking to be in care.
So in the UK at the moment, there's a number of thousands of children in the care, some of them seeking adoptive placements, some of them in foster care, and that may be where they stay. When I look, there's a website that we use when we're searching for families who are looking to adopt. And I did some research on the website in preparation for this. And when I had a look, at the moment, there's about 500 live profiles on the website itself of children that are looking to be adopted. Now, those profiles will be a combination of single children, sibling pairs, some even sibling groups of 3, perhaps even 4 children. And when I narrowed it down to have a look at children where they were of Muslim faith, there were 20 live profiles, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually within those profiles, there were a number of sibling pairs and even bigger sibling groups of children that were waiting to be adopted.
Right, okay. So why are children coming into care, do you think? I know there's a whole, wide range of issues. And perhaps, we could perhaps specifically just look at the Muslim community as to why, and this is a question to both of you, why do you think, obviously, Hannah, from your experience of actually working in an adoption agency, and also Sheikh Osman, from your experience of working in the communities? So, Sheikh Osman, would you like to just start?
Certainly. People, I've asked kind of people about the reasons why they think children go into care. And many of them, and some of these are kind of key people in the community, movers and shakers, and their understanding and awareness is that, well, if there is problem at home, if social services get involved, or if the parents die in an accident, for example, then the child will be taken into care, without realizing that there are a whole range of issues, a whole range of circumstances by which children end up in care. And this could range from, the inability of the parents, i.e. not having decent parental skills, to illness, to a major operation, to COVID. Even, a lot of children have gone into care because of the parents, being lost to COVID, or being incapacitated, family disputes, divorces, and things like that, as well as physical and sexual abuse by members of the own family. So when you kind of explain to people, then they appear to be shocked that they didn't realize that there are so many routes through which children can end up into care without no fault of their own in most of the cases, unless you have children that are problematic in terms of truancy at school, getting on the wrong side of the law, and the courts decide that the child needs to be taken away from the parents. So that's one thing. And in terms of statistics, the live profiles that Hannah has talked about is from I'm assuming from a particular website that gives details of cases that are awaiting adoption. But when we look at the number of children from Muslim heritage in care, this is both fostering and adoption, it's estimated there are nearly 5,000 children that are in care. And when you say this to people, 5,000, it's just mind-boggling how so many children could be in that situation of being away from their biological families. So it is something that I feel passionate about in raising awareness in Muslim community, because there's a misunderstanding between the term adoption and the term kafala, which is taking care of children.
Can I come back to that in a minute?
Okay.
Because obviously that's fostering and adoption is two different things. Hannah, do you want to add on to that? I mean, is there any reasons that you see Muslim children coming into care, anything more other than what's been mentioned?
Yeah, so I mean, the reasons can vary, but quite often it's can be things in terms of neglect, parents who are perhaps substance misusing, perhaps parents who have learning difficulties themselves. So it's not necessarily possible for them to parent their child or children, in a way that's, necessary to protect the child or children. Can also be things down to a particular medical condition. It can be a whole range of factors. I mean, the hope is always that support can be put in place for children to remain at home, either with their birth parents or perhaps extended family.
Relatives,
so adoption is always kind of seen as there isn't another solution.
Okay, now we are talking adoption in this program and not necessarily fostering, but Hannah, if you could perhaps just, for our audience, just explain the difference between adoption and fostering in as seen in the UK legal system anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, our agency, we specialise in adoption, so we don't do fostering, but I mean, with fostering, generally children are with you and you are looking after them in a sense, until an adoptive family comes forward to adopt them. So they would then be their legal parents. There can be short-term fostering and long-term fostering. So some children where it's thought that adoption isn't the best plan, they may remain in foster care and they may remain with long-term foster carers. But as an agency, so we're looking to recruit adopters where they will be the legal parents of the child or children that they go on to adopt.
Okay, and that my understanding is if you're a foster carer, there's also an allowance that's paid as a foster carer, but as an adopted parent, there is not an allowance that's paid. You basically just have responsibility for the child in all aspects.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. So you are paid an allowance as a foster carer. When you're adopting, sometimes you may be given something that's called a settling in allowance, where perhaps you're given some money by the local authority where the child is or children are from, in terms of helping them to have things they would need to settle into your home. Sometimes for particular children, for say, if there was a sibling group of 3 that were being adopted, then there may be some financial support. Because again, finding adopters to come forward for, 3 children is very rare. So in that instance, there perhaps would be some sort of financial support.
Okay, so Sheikh Osman, is this what you were referring to in your difference between adoption and you said taking care? Or would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, the distinction that is made between fostering and adoption is there, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of the stigma for the child, as well as the family that's taking in someone either temporarily or on a short term or a long term. This concept has been stigmatized, and therefore it affects individuals and children, regardless of whether they're going into care through the fostering route or being going down the adoption route.
So stigma for who? Stigma for the family who has the child, the birth family you're talking about?
It can be both for the birth family and the family that is adopting a child, because these are kind of cultural baggages that a lot of people carry across from their country of origin, and particularly where people have this notion of associating inappropriate behavior in a previous life or in a previous existence or previously, this notion of karma and dharma that affects one in their life, that part of that cultural baggage associates, guilt and negativity to the child, as well as those that are giving up their child or having to give up their child. And indeed, those that are unable to have children are also stigmatized that you must have done something wrong for God not to bless you with a child. So this notion of stigma is across the board, and it affects both. It can affect both the child, particularly, if families have heard stories of cases of adoption not going well, or cases of fostering not going well, and then the negativity from that narrative then extends. So it discourages people to even attempt to take a child under their care because they've heard something bad. And as human nature, when we hear something good, then we can say, yes, maybe that's what I would like. But when we hear something bad, then we say, it's better to steer clear from it.
But there are also plenty of, the flip side of that. So there are plenty of success stories as well. There are plenty of people who have adopted. And I think there is a changing ethos as well. Perhaps it depends on where, the communities one lives in. But certainly, in London, I know several families who have adopted or fostering, whatever. And it's actually open arms. It's actually welcomed. And it's embraced because it's such a noble task to do. And it's encouraging to see people come forward and say, what, this is okay to do. And we should embrace it, because this is, these children are our children. You save one life, and this is a tradition of our Prophet. You save one life, you say it is as if you have saved the whole of humanity. So we're also giving, children a better chance of a brighter future. And it doesn't mean that they lose contact totally with their birth family. I mean, obviously, depending on circumstances. But Hannah, perhaps we can also just talk about the process of adoption as well. So I think many of our audience wouldn't know how to and what the process is. And I'm also going to encourage, if there are any members of our audience out there who would like to contribute to this discussion or ask something, the phone number to ring in is 077 614 60614, 077 614 60614. You can comment on Facebook on Ramadan Radio London, and text or WhatsApp on the number that I've just mentioned. So we are broadcasting on 87.9 FM on ramadanradio.org. So Hannah, we're going to talk about the process of adoption. So I know it's quite a lengthy process, but if you can just talk us through, that'd be really helpful.
So, I mean, in terms of going through the process to be approved as an adopter, So normally what happens is you might call, hopefully PACT as an organisation, for instance, and you would speak to one of our inquiries team, and they would take some initial information from you over the phone and talk to you about how we work as an organisation and about the children that we are trying to recruit families for.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do a sort of small telephone interview with you over the phone. And they'd encourage you to come to one of our virtual information evenings, which we hold 2 or 3 times a month. And you can then come along and hear from somebody who's adopted through PACT and hear about their experience, but also get more of a feel for us as an agency and how we work. And if you still felt positive about, adopting and about PACT after that, then we would invite you in for an initial interview with one of our social workers. And again, at the moment, they're being done virtually. And that would kind of just be an extension of the conversation that you've already had with one of the inquiries team about, why you're coming forward to adopt, maybe the type of child that you're looking to adopt, and a bit about your life as well in terms of, your support network, what you do for a living. And after that, we would make a decision about offering you a registration of interest, which is kind of an application form to start the formal adoption process to be approved. And you'll then go into what's called stage 1. And during stage 1, which takes about 2 months, you will attend our preparation course, which is kind of a training course we offer to all of our potential adopters, which is a 4-day course. We'll also carry out references on yourselves, and we'll ask you to have a medical done by your GP. And once you've completed stage 1, which, as I say, takes about 2 months, you then go into stage 2, which is a 4-month process where you're allocated a social worker who will write an assessment about yourselves, kind of your whole lives, really. And again, mainly focusing on, why you've come forward to adopt, your motivation to adopt.
So you have regular meetings with the social worker during that time?
Yeah, so again, most of those meetings at the moment are being done virtually because of obviously the situation with COVID. But yes, so they would visit you regularly for a number of weeks whilst they're putting this assessment together.
Right.
So I know there is
any tasks involved for the potential adopters in that time?
Yes, I mean, we encourage potential adopters to do as much research as possible. So there's books that we have a reading list, and we encourage our adopters to read some of the books they feel would be relevant to them in terms of their situation. There's also lots of podcasts, there's online training you can do. So we try and ask our adopters to kind of come through as prepared as possible in terms of, the research they've done into adoption and the children in care and what their needs are likely to be. We also encourage all of our adopters, where possible, to do some voluntary work with children. And that could be, it could be as little as 1 hour a week in your local school, your local nursery, or, again, wherever you feel would be relevant to you, but so that you do have some hands-on childcare experience.
Okay. So if you just go on with the process, and I'm going to come back to the kind of people that can adopt and who cannot adopt. So that would be stage 2. So you have these weekly meetings with your social worker, and then what happens?
Yeah, so they then you're then taken to our panel, and once you're approved as adopters.
What's a panel?
So you come to our approval panel, which is a group of people. Again, there's probably all of whom have backgrounds that are relevant to adoption. So one might be a social worker, one might be a foster carer, one might be someone who's adopted themselves. And they'll ask you a number of questions based on the report that's been written about you, which is called a PAR, Prospective Adopters Report. So they'll ask you a number of questions. Your social worker's with you, so they're supporting you through that meeting, and they make a decision at the end of that whether or not to approve you as an adopter or adopters. Okay. And so it's after that process that we then start searching, for the right child or children for you.
And how long can that process take, depending on what is required, I guess?
I mean, at the moment, again, it's kind of unprecedented times in terms of the effect that COVID has had on the climate, but I would say most of our adopters are sort of being linked at the moment, so linked to a particular child or children within about 6 months of their approval, which actually is far longer than normally we would look at. But that's because of the effect that COVID has had on the climate. But for some people, it can be far quicker than that. For some people, it can take longer. It is just about, finding the right child or children, for that adopter or adopters.
So from start to end could be about a year, roughly.
Yes, certainly.
Right. And it's quite an intensive time, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot of commitment to have sort of weekly meetings with your social worker. And is there any costs involved for a potential adoptive parents? Are there any costs involved in this process?
No, so the only thing you do pay for as part of the process is your medical, which your GP practice do charge for. But other than that, the rest of the process, no, you don't pay for.
Okay, so it's obviously an investment in time and resources to get to that stage. And you're actually involved in the family linking part, aren't you? So you're in stage 3, if you like.
Yes, so once you're approved, so my team and myself, so we focus on looking after our adopters and finding the right child or children for them. So as I say, we use a website where local authorities and regional adoption agencies profile children that they are trying to find adoptive placements for. We use that and help our adopters guide themselves along that website to find a profile or profiles of children that could be the right match for them.
So the parents or a parent can choose their child. Some people have this assumption that they can't choose, how the child matches for them, if it's okay, if it's a boy or a girl. But these are all questions that are dealt with as part of the process.
Yeah, so absolutely, you're very involved in terms of choosing your child or children. What I should say is that actually sometimes there's more than one family looking at the same child or children. So sometimes it can be quite difficult because it may be that you face some rejections along the way, particularly as you're searching for your child or children, because perhaps for one reason or another family might be thought that they would be a better match for that child or children. So it can be a bit of a roller coaster, certainly when we're searching. And so it's about being able to kind of keep yourself open to, looking at the website and looking at each profile of a child or children on their own merits and thinking about whether they would be right to help complete your family.
And this website is only available once you get past the panel stage. It's not something that people can just have a look at or browse.
No, so as an agency, we help our adopters to join the website once they've been approved. And then once we've had the agency decision maker from our head of service after you've been approved at panel, we then set your profile live on the website. So you create a profile for yourself on the website. So you have photos of yourselves, photos of your home, and there's some descriptive content as well in terms of, again, information about yourselves, the type of child that you're looking for, all the things that you have to offer. And once you've been approved and your approval has been verified by our head of service, we help you join the website and create your profile, and we then begin the search for you.
So in the same way there's children's profiles, there's profiles of the potential adopters, and also I guess then the children have a social worker and they link into the parent's social worker.
Yes. So they'll have a family finding social worker and a child social worker quite often. So it will be the family finding social worker that responds to us when we reach out to them about the child or children that they're trying to find an adoptive family for.
Okay. And once a match is potentially made, what happens then? The child doesn't obviously just come straight into your home.
No. So, for instance, if you've found a profile of a child on the website that you're interested in, you would show interest in that profile, and you would send a message directly from yourselves to that social worker about why you felt that child could be the right child for you. They would then respond if they felt positive about you also, and then a dialogue begins between ourselves as your kind of family finder and with the social worker for that child. And if everybody remains interested after exchanging information, they would then visit you in your home and they would ask you questions, and they would also share more information with you about that particular child. And if that meeting was positive and both parties still wanted to proceed, you would then be what we call potentially linked. So you would then be moving forward just with that child, and your kind of terms in terms of the search would be complete. So you would then do things like meet the foster carer for the child, so where they're placed currently. You would meet the medical advisor for that local authority or regional adoption agency, and they would go through the medical information about that child with you. If, say, the child was like nursery age or school age, you might perhaps meet their, teacher. You might go to the nursery where they go to and speak to the workers there.
So you get as much information as possible
absolutely.
around that time. Right, okay. And then if still interested, then the child.
And if that's all positive, then you go to a matching panel at that particular local authority or regional adoption agency. So similar to the panel that you've had at PACT where you've been approved as adopters, you then go to another panel at that particular local authority or a regional adoption agency where you're approved as a match for that particular child.
Right, okay. And then once that's okay, then the child is
So once you go through that the matching panel, you then begin what's called introductions with that child, which is kind of a phased introductions over a period of time. And again, that can vary depending on whether it's a single child or a sibling pair. But normally they might last between a week to 2 weeks, where you might meet the child for the first day for an hour, then the second day it might be 2 hours, the third day it might be a morning, and so on. And there's a meeting midway in between those introductions to see how everybody's doing and how the introduction process is going. And then at the end of that period, the child would be placed in your home.
Does the child stay with you possibly for like a night or so before the actual permanent move?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it kind of varies by local authority, but you would be very much involved in that conversation in terms of what the plans for introductions were. And certainly your social worker would be involved in those discussions too, in terms of what would be most beneficial for the child you're adopting, but also for yourselves as a family.
And is contact with birth family, does it then just totally stop?
So a lot of children will have had what's called a farewell contact, where they would have said goodbye to their birth parents for a long time. The key thing that we really advocate for as an agency is that our adopters are open to what's called direct contact with siblings. So perhaps where it's a larger sibling, it's a larger group of children, and the idea is not to place them all for adoption together. So perhaps they might be placed in adoption separately, or they may be remaining in long-term foster care. We really ask our adopters to be open to that idea of continuing that sibling relationship, because for these children, that may be the only constant they've had.
Right.
And it might be meeting up just a number of times a year, perhaps writing letters, Zoom calls, but maintaining that relationship in terms of.
And what about parents, birth parents, or other relatives?
So in the main, most adopters aren't keen on the idea of direct contact with birth family. And that's not to say that's the case for every child. So for some children, there will be a requirement that you would maintain a relationship directly with birth parents. And again, that might be about seeing them, 2 or 3 times a year. In most cases, what's required or what's asked for is called letterbox contact, which is where you would write a letter, again, which is once or twice a year, and that's sent to a letterbox where birth parents can receive the letter, and they can send a letter back to you, again, via a letterbox system.
So via letterbox, you mean via social services? So the adoptive parents are not actually writing a letter and putting an address on?
No.
Direct to a birth family?
So it's done through a letterbox system.
It's done so there's anonymous, this confidential information, i.e. the address of where the child is now is not passed on, and the family's name. So
yes.
that they can't actually come and knock on your door, I guess.
Yes, so absolutely. Your confidentiality is kept 100% safe, absolutely. So, and of course, sometimes they may ask as well that you maintain a relationship with the foster carer, because again, for instance, the child or children that you go on to adopt may have been with that foster carer from birth. They may have been there for a number of years. So they will have played a significant part in their life. So again, they might ask that you'd be open to maintaining that relationship, and again, meeting up with them a number of times a year, staying in touch.
And what about the name? I mean, is it recommended that you would change the name of the child, like the surname or the first name?
No, so I mean, obviously, once you legally adopt the child or children, they would have your surname. But in terms of their first name, again, we don't advocate that you would change a child's name.
Okay.
And again, particularly because that is the name that their birth family have given to them.
Right.
So sometimes you might perhaps give them a middle name again when you legally adopt them.
Okay. So Sheikh Osman, can I just bring you in here? I think you're muted at the moment, brother. So if just the issue about the name, from sort of like an Islamic perspective, because we are encouraged to keep the names of the fathers, aren't we?
We are encouraged to call people by their father's name. This goes back to when Prophet ﷺ adopted Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anh. And we need to understand that the adoption happened when Hazrat Zayd was an adult. He came into the Prophet's care as a gift from his wife Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, who'd received Hazrat Zayd as someone that had been enslaved. And then Hazrat Zayd's father came looking for him, and this is after 2 decades. He realizes that his son is alive and he is with the Prophet. And he wanted to sort of take him back. And Hazrat Zayd decided not to go back with his father, but stay in the company, saying that I've noticed in this man something amazing. And this is before a prophethood had been declared. So he taunted him by saying that, you have an option of being a free person or remaining a slave. To which the Prophet ﷺ took Hazrat Zayd near the Kaaba as an adult and said that from this day onward, I set you free. So you're a free man and you have the choice of going back or staying with me. And he chose to stay with the Prophet ﷺ. Then the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Makkah to Medina. And the ayats in the Quran which says, call them by their father's name, are ayats that were revealed in the Medina period, not in Makkah period. And that was to sort of say that the biological identity, right, and the lineage needs to be maintained, that we don't give children that have been adopted a false sense of identity for them to then be led into reality later on, and that could come as a shock and an identity crisis. So it's really, really important from an Islamic perspective to let the child know what its origins are. But that does not mean that because you cannot call them by the adoptive parents' names, that it is discouraged. Indeed, there are many instances where the Prophet himself has gone to someone that's been orphaned, and he was crying outside the house, sitting down, really, really down, and comforted the child by patting on his head. He was missing his father who had died in a battle of Uhud or Badr. The Prophet said, would you not like that I be your father and Aisha be your mother? To which the child kind of perked up and eventually went into the care of the Holy Prophet as his adopted child. So there's nothing wrong in calling the adoptive parents mum or dad Islamically. It is when you are talking about the individual or calling them that you need to ensure that the child's real identity is not camouflaged. It's not hidden in society or to the child.
So it's about basically not having secrets, isn't it? It's about the child knowing that they've been adopted, knowing that this is not your real biological mother or father. There is a family relation beyond that, but these are people who've taken you on as their children. And that's something that I think all adoption agencies encourage anyway, that the child knows where their roots are. And, certainly in Islam, blood relatives are very, very important because it brings on the whole issue of hijab. Now, hijab is called like the screening or the kind of freedom of expression for, males and females and so on and so forth. So when does, Sheikh Osman, that become an issue? And I think we've had a question linked to that as well. And if I can just, again, it's like when a child becomes mature, does the mother or father have to consider hijab for them from a young age? So okay. What would you say to that?
I mean, hijab, the notion of hijab is common decency. And I think hijab is misunderstood in the sense of total segregation. So even in a normal, and I use the word normal, not to denigrate a situation that is not normal, but generally speaking, in a family environment, we maintain hijab. So I have daughters-in-law, I have sons-in-law, and there is a decorum when interacting with one another, that we maintain a modesty. And that is applicable to someone that is a blood relative or a non-blood relative, and indeed when interacting with a stranger. So that remains regardless whether the child is young or mature. and has become an adult. Indeed, it's kind of encouraged that you maintain that modesty, because children, through social conditioning and the way that they are reared, develop and value, private space and own space, and the need to be mindful of others. So that practice is encouraged from a very young age, and it's only extended so that you avoid the possibility of a sinful interaction happening. But other than that, there isn't much beyond the hijab when it comes to interaction. And clearly, there have been studies done which say that, if you've lived as a family unit with someone that is not a blood relative, there is something that discourages us to behave inappropriately with that particular family unit. And there is a reference in the Quran as well, although it's not directly linked to that. It talks about men that do not have a desire for a woman that may not be blood related, that those are some of the permissible categories of individuals that come and go into your house, and that there is a relaxation. So it's not a hard and fast as some people feel. Some people do feel really particular about this, and that view needs to be respected. And maybe if they feel that strongly about that aspect of interaction, then adoption or fostering, whether it's suitable for them or not, is a question mark that needs to be kind of answered by themselves, as well as people like Hannah and agencies that are the interface between a placement and a family.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, Hannah. Then, the kind of people that can adopt, who can adopt? Single, married, non in a relationship. Just if you have an overview of that, please.
Yeah, so I mean, you can adopt as a single person, you can adopt as a couple. For us as an agency, we ask if you're a couple that you've been together and living together for a minimum of 2 years. You do have to be over the age of 21 to adopt. We ask also that you're non-smoking, so that you've not smoked for at least 6 months. You don't have to own your accommodation, you could be renting. We do ask, obviously, for a spare bedroom for a child. And some local authorities or regional adoption agencies will ask for a spare room for each child that you adopt. So again, that might be something that we would have a discussion with you about, in terms of what you were looking for, whether you were looking for a single child or a sibling pair, for instance. And we ask that you're financially secure enough to be able to look after a child or children, and that you have an ability to ideally be able to give up work for a period of 12 months so that you can be at home and help the child or children, settle into a new life with you. So
if you're a couple, there'd be an expectation for one person, not both, presumably.
So one person to remain at home for 12 months. And again, as an agency, we understand that that's not always possible. So for instance, for some of our couples, they might take 6 months each, so one might be at home for 6 months and then, the other might be at home for 6 months. Or it might just be one of them takes off 12 months. So it's whatever's deemed best. If it was someone who was coming forward for an older child, say perhaps a child who was or a sibling pair where they were kind of 4 upwards, then they were only able to perhaps be off work for 6 months, then again we would look at that. So it's case by case. We try to be as open as possible in terms of helping people who do want to come forward to adopt.
Okay, and all kinds of faiths, nationalities, everybody's welcomed.
Yeah,
regardless of any orientation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, we know there's a really big requirement for families that are of Muslim faith to come forward, because the reality is that if families aren't there for the children to be adopted by, then they will either be placed with families that aren't of the same faith or the same ethnic makeup, or perhaps will remain in foster care.
Right. Okay. And how many children are placed in sort of non-Muslim or sort of other faith or non-faith families?
Because we don't have any children of our own, so we rely on local authorities and regional adoption agencies. So it's not an easy question for me to answer, but when we're looking after families, we try to ethnically match them as much as possible, and also match them in terms of their faith.
And if they're in a non-Muslim family, are their Muslim traditions respected within that? Is there any way that people can reach out to maybe like help if there are? I know, because I know in the past there have been some fostering agencies who were looking for support. I remember at Eid time or Ramadan times, they wanted to provide like gifts in a box for children who were Muslim, but in a non-Muslim foster home, so that they could at least have something that reminds them of, you know, of their birth home.
Yeah, so if, say, in terms of adoption, if it was not possible to find, say, a family who were of Muslim faith, then it would be trying to find a family who were in a position that they could still help the child to learn about their faith and about their culture and about their identity. You know, so you might look at things in terms of who they have in their support work, in their support network, for instance, maybe the area they live in, is it a diverse area? And also, what things do they feel able to do in terms of helping the child to learn about their identity and culture? You know, what research will they be able to help their child do? How will they be able to advocate for that child or children in terms of, you know, the things that are important for like the Muslim faith?
Okay, so there's lots of things to consider there, aren't they? Sheikh Osman, just coming on to the inheritance briefly as well, because I know there's something that we should know in Islam about inheritance towards adopted children. If you'd just like to give us a brief synopsis.
Children that are adopted do not automatically qualify as a blood child would. But that doesn't mean that they cannot benefit from the estate of the deceased. The way the rules regarding inheritance work is that up to 1/3 of the estate can be given away to an organization or a person of their choice. So this could be, you know, a charity. It could also be the child or children that are adopted by them. So to equalize, what they would do is look at how many other heirs there are and eligible heirs in the estate. And from 1/3 of the estate, a portion could be allocated, which could be more than what a blood child would receive, or it could be equal or less than that. But that is a choice that a person has in terms of their inheritance. So they can inherit from the 1/3 of the amount that's left. My apologies for the phone that's ringing.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'll come up to Hannah. Maybe you can just mute that for a second, if possible. Hannah, if people wanted to find out more about PACT, now PACT is an adoption charity. People have a choice of either going to a charity or they can then go to their local authority as well, can't they?
Yep, so we're based in the southeast, so we cover London, Reading, Oxford and Brighton. If people wanted to find out more about adopting through PACT, they could go onto our website, where there's lots of information about our agency, and there's videos that you can watch about the process and about being approved with PACT. Okay,
and do you want to just mention the website? I know it's been on our flyer, but you know, for those who may not have seen our flyer, what is the website?
So it's www.pactcharity.org. And also there's a information box you can fill on there where you can request a call back from one of our inquiries team if you do want to just find out more about adoption generally and or also adopting through PACT. And the inquiries team will then sort of answer any questions that you have. But there's lots of information on our website.
Okay, that's brilliant. So the first point of call is pactcharity.org. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. Okay. So Sheikh Osman, would you like to perhaps give any advice to our audience out there? You know, we are obviously encouraging them to find out more about adoption. So if you could just perhaps give some final remarks as we're coming to the end of our program now as well to the audience, please.
I just remind viewers and listeners that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has said that those that take care of the orphan or the abandoned children will be with me together in paradise like this. So
two fingers, for those of us who don't get a visual, it's two fingers to put together. That's how close they would be.
Yeah, so it is, you know, an act of great virtue to take care. Interestingly, when Allah talks about us as people in our creation, and He emphasizes in Surah Nisa, the word womb, the importance of blood relatives or relation. The next verse and the next few verses talk about the needs and the rights of the orphan and children that have been abandoned. So there is a strong connection between the fact of giving love and care and compassion to your own children by birth, but it's equally important, and in many respects more important, to take care of those that sadly don't have the love, care, and compassion of their biological family.
We hope that our audience has benefited from this conversation. You have been listening to Know Your Deen show with your sister Irma. We've been covering adoption in Islam. I'd like to thank my two very precious guests here, Hannah Jennings from the PACT charity and Sheikh Osman from the Nikah Services in Birmingham. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope it's been a useful discussion for everybody out there. So this is the last Know Your Deen program now in Ramadan. As we know, we're coming to the end of the month. I hope people have benefited from this show and the other shows that I have done. Please remember us in your prayers as we come towards the last few days of this month. And we hope that to see you all at some point under better circumstances. This month has been a month of blessing. It's been also a month of loss for some people, loss of jobs, loss of income, loss of family. And we've also got to remember all those people who've gone through hardship in this month as well. So please pray for us, pray for this radio station, which has been amazing. People have really volunteered and given their time and sacrificed things to be here so that we can present different shows to you during this month. So do remember us all in your prayers. And we're going to sign off now, and wishing you all a very happy Eid and a blessed rest of the year. And remember, this month was the 1 month of training for the remaining 11 months. So don't be a part-time Ramadan Muslim, okay? This 1 month prepares you for the 11, and the 11 prepare you for the 1, okay? So after you finish this month, keep on praying, keep up all those good tasks. The small tasks that are done regularly are better light in the eyes of Allah. So stay consistent. Don't just say, okay, see you Ramadan radio and come back next year. No, keep up your task, keep up the good work that you've all been doing. You've all got into a habit. Keep it going. The Sahaba used to pray for 6 months after Ramadan that Allah accept what we did in Ramadan. And then they used to spend the next 6 months preparing for the next Ramadan. So we don't know if we're going to get another Ramadan or not. Some people have lost their lives during this month. Some people have lost their lives during the year. So we are fortunate to be in this position. So enjoy the benefits of it. Stay focused, stay safe. I am signing out now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.